just off the top, thanks for coming on the show.
Mm-hmm.
Nicholas Gluba. Tell us a little about your background and what makes you the right candidate to represent Iowans in Congress.
So, I was born actually just down the road here at Mercy Hospital. I grew up on a cattle ranch in between Williamsburg and Parnell, Iowa. It's about 30 to 40 minutes west of here, depending on which direction and how fast you go. I also grew up largely in Lone Tree, where I still currently reside, and am a sitting city councilman there. Following the events of Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, I decided to join the United States Marine Corps because I'm the kind of person that if I see a problem, I decide that I need to fix it as best possible. So I joined the United States Marine Corps, was active and went to Operation Iraqi Freedom, so Iraq, Fallujah, Habbaniyah, Azargia, Saqlawiyah, and roughly in that area. And while I was over there, it's where I developed an incredibly anti-war stance. What we were doing wasn't benefiting anybody on either side. It was only benefiting the war profiteering corporations back here in the United States. It wasn't benefiting the Iraqi people. It wasn't benefiting the American people. It was just a very, very costly mistake that we were doing.
When it comes to Iowa specifically, you said you were born here.
Yes.
When did you come back from the Marine Corps and decide to, I guess, reside where you're currently living in Lone Tree?
Mm-hmm.
Have you been living there since you come back from the Marine Corps?
Yes. Actually, I did live in Iowa City for a little while as well. Interesting thing that had happened there. My father and my grandparents, they both lived in Iowa City. My grandparents, due to age and physical limitations, no longer had the ability to live in the house that they had because it was a split-level home. Mm-hmm. My dad, being significantly younger than them, bought their house, and then I bought his place. So we just kind of did like a round robin.
A generational swap of houses.
So that way everybody's current living arrangement could fit their physical needs and limitations. But then after that, I moved back to Lone Tree because my grandparents and at the time great-grandparents both lived in Lone Tree, and with my great-grandparents being in their 90s and then my grandparents being not significantly younger than them, I understood that my grandparents, or my great-grandparents, needed help at the time, and then my grandparents they needed help but weren't willing to admit it yet. Mm-hmm. So I tried to buy a house fairly equidistant between the two. Ended up being slightly closer to my grandparents than to my great-grandparents, but Lone Tree's a town of 1 mile corner to corner, mm-hmm. So it's close either way.
So you have some pretty strong roots here in
Yes.
Iowa. What does it mean to run as an independent in a two-party system? It's dominated by these two parties. You said you developed this anti-war stance, which I guess in turn would mean mentally struggling with this sense of patriotism about America that's kind of instilled in everyone from here, and slowly learning to counter that. Did that influence your political stance, and is that...
Oh, very definitely.
Did that play into...
So the Libertarian Party, one of our major planks, major tenets of the party is the non-aggression principle, or the NAP, as we would like to refer to it, which states that libertarians are a non-aggressive party, and we do not believe in global interference and global wars. We believe in a very, very heavily defended nation. So, as opposed to us oppressing our will globally, we would sit back and form a neutral stance very similar to that of Switzerland. Switzerland has their armed neutrality policy, and we would like to see that instilled here in the United States, where we still have a military, we still have the strongest, and we still have the best trained military in the world. We just don't use them out to solve global conflicts that have nothing to do with us. It's similar to how Switzerland has a great military. They're well funded, they're well trained. They don't send them all around the world to impose their will upon other countries.
Would you say your identity, you're running in the Libertarian Party, isn't more about alignment with the party principles than a rejection of the other two parties?
No, actually, so I have been with the other two parties previously, and they just never quite fit specifically. There was aspects of them that I liked, but then there was aspects of them that I absolutely despised. So, like the Democrats, they have a very, very open liberal stance on civil liberties, and the fact that Democrats basically just have always gone with you do you. We don't care what you're doing so long as it's not harming anybody. But then they have other aspects that I obviously disagreed with: expansive government spending, anti-personal rights, anti-ownership rights, and those kind of aspects. As opposed to Republicans, they were, and this is a past tense thing now, but they were very big into ownership rights and personal rights under law. But then they would restrict like medical freedoms, like the freedom of abortion, those kind of things. And then obviously they had, there's a racial bias in the Republican Party, which never really sat well with me. There's a religious bias in the Republican Party that never really sat well with me. But there were aspects of either party that I liked, and what had happened was a friend of mine from the Marine Corps, he was over at my house one time, me and him were just having a couple of beers, hanging around, and he was like, you know, I noticed there's Pink Floyd posters and guns all over the place in your house. I was like, well, yeah, I like Pink Floyd and I like guns. He was like, you ever heard of the Libertarian Party? I'm vaguely familiar at the time. I was like, well, I know about Ron Paul. And then he was like, here, let me sit you down and we'll go over something. And then he introduced me to the Libertarian Party. I was like, actually, this makes a lot of sense. I kind of really like what's happening right here, where you have the civil liberties, you have the ability to do what you want to do so long as you're not hurting other people, but you also have very, very strong property and ownership rights. So
It's kind of treading that middle ground and taking different aspects of both parties.
most people do fundamentally agree with the principles of the Libertarian Party. There might be some aspects that they don't specifically agree with. Some people do want a larger government than the Libertarian Party. The Libertarian Party is a borderline anarcho-system. Libertarians still recognize that there is a purpose for government. So we're not full anarchists, but we're really, really riding that line.
Anarchists with limitations. Going back to your military experience a little bit, you kind of already touched on this, but what did your experience there look like? What were some of the deeper values, some of the top notes of what you took away from your experience there?
So while I was in the Marines, I went to MCRD San Diego, which San Diego is a beautiful place. That specific spot, not so much. Then I was at Camp Pendleton, 29 Palms, Camp Lejeune. Spent a good amount of time on ship, mostly LSD class naval vessels, where if you're a Marine on a naval vessel, you're just kind of in the way, but they had to transport us somehow. So, but then, you know, we served in Operation Iraqi Freedom, so in Iraq, and that's where I developed the anti-war stance. You know, seeing all these Iraqi people that they just wanted to live their lives. They did have an oppressive government, but it wasn't our job as Americans to come in and remove the oppressive government that was there, essentially because we put it there.
Were there any specific experiences that made you doubt the fact that the U.S. was being useful in their operations there?
Oh, quite frequently we would have issues with locals in the area that they saw us more as just an occupational force in their country. It'd be no different than if another much larger, more powerful nation were to come to the United States and just say, hey, this is the way you have to live now. And then send troops throughout our area, send patrols throughout our area to make sure that we are living the way that other nation happened. That was what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. We came over to people incredibly different from us culturally, and we imposed, this is how we need to operate here, to people that lived already their own lives. We had told them, no, this is how you need to do things. They'd already been doing things their way for a long time. We had uprooted and reversed their culture, which is honestly a terrible thing to see. To go to another country and tell them that their culture is wrong and we need to have our culture instilled here, it'd literally be no different than if a much larger nation were to come to the United States and impose their will on us.
It's textbook. Is neocolonialism the word?
Yes.
Just inserting yourself into a
It's very
in which-
neo-imperialist nature.
How does your military experience shape your political beliefs, and how will that be reflected in your policy making?
Largely because I saw us impose our will in these undeveloped nations throughout the Middle East, and then also we spent a lot of time working down in South America. The United States spending the amount that we do, billions and trillions of dollars to impose our will outside of our borders, is just absolutely absurd. I would like to, if any bill comes across that says, hey, we need to start sending billions upon billions of dollars to inflect our will on this nation, I would automatically, no, absolutely not. One, our country doesn't have it. We're, $36 trillion in debt right now, which if you average that out against all people of the United States, and that would be the elderly, working class people, and children, that's roughly $108,000 to $109,000 in debt per person in the United States. Essentially, we all have a looming mortgage hanging above our heads that we're going to have to pay back. That's why our national debt has now become the largest expenditure in the United States. It just surpassed military expenditures. I believe it was last month. Anything that we can do to stop spending on global policy, we need to start doing, because we can't afford, I can't afford 2 mortgages. I have a mortgage on my house. I can't afford to be paying the government for all this other stuff.
This is essentially a mortgage we're all born with.
Yes.
I mean, on top of personal debt that's acquired over a lifetime, this is just a from birth debt that all Americans kind of have looming over. I guess a common critique of this stance would be, it sounds good in theory to withdraw the U.S. from these other international conflicts, to take a step back and reinvest domestically. But, when an actual war comes around, there's a little bit of maybe we should provide assistance morally. Given that there are 2 major conflicts happening right now, does this affect your stance at all?
So I recognize the global conflicts that are happening right now. By the 2, I would assume you would go with the Russian-Ukrainian conflict and the Israeli and Palestinian conflicts. Yes. The way I see it is none of those countries are in the United States. We cannot afford as a country to prop up any other country right now. If it did directly affect the United States, I would say absolutely, we need to do something about this. But a Russian-Ukrainian conflict or an Israeli-Palestinian conflict, although what those people are going through is absolutely terrible, I've seen war firsthand. It is not a pretty sight by any means. We cannot afford, both financially and the lives of our children, my generation's children, to be your generation, because I'm old and fat and I can't fight no war anymore, but the lives that could be lost potentially by sending people or sending money into the Russian-Ukrainian conflict or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it's too great a risk for us right now.
While we're on the subject, there's limited action that can be taken from a state level when it comes to foreign policy. Given that the U.S. does have so much invested politically in the state of Israel, does that affect anything about your stance there? Or do you believe the same principles should apply to the state of Israel?
Absolutely. Israel is not in the United States. We can't fund Israel's war with with the Palestinian people and Hamas. It's not something that we should be funding. I know we've been an ally essentially since the United States, Great Britain, France, and Germany created Israel as a sovereign nation, but we don't need to be propping them up with, now it would be trillions of dollars. It's currently, we're sending billions upon billions of dollars over there. I don't have a spare $1 billion to be giving.
With tackling this issue and bringing resources back to the mainland US as opposed to all of our stations across the globe, what would that look like? Would this look like a shuffling of budgets and diverting military funds, or disassembling actual military outposts globally and bringing back the technology and the manpower? What's more emphasized in this?
So, international presence isn't specifically needed. Now, we do have an international presence. We have multiple bases in Germany. We have bases throughout the Middle East. We have bases, one of the largest bases, and a really, really interesting base the United States Marine Corps has in Okinawa, Japan. Then we have South Korean bases. We have all of this asset outside the United States borders. I would like to see that brought back to the United States. We can keep a very small reserve there to work with the local nationals of that populace, because I do know Germany, they've been back and forth on the issue of having U.S. troops in their borders on the basis of like Leipzig and Ramstein. Now, with the Ukrainian-Russian conflict happening, right, they have been more acceptable for having U.S. troops in that area. And we could have a small, very, very small contingent just for cross-training with the German troops and the Polish troops in that area. Same thing with South Korean, Japanese areas. We could have a small contingent, but we don't need to have these large multi-billion-dollar bases in those areas. We would bring those troops home. We would return the land to those nations that it's currently sitting on. And then even in our bases within the United States borders, we could shrink those considerably and not spend as much. We would still obviously need a military, because if we don't have a military, we would have the ability to be overrun by any country, essentially anywhere. But we would still have a military. It would just be a neutral military, that we would not join sides with other interests unless it directly affected the United States. So we would save trillions of dollars doing that annually, trillions of dollars.
Mm-hmm. Bringing it back to Iowa specifically, how could Iowans benefit from bringing some of these assets and reinvesting back into the mainland US?
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously we would have less deficit spending at the national level, which would then in turn enable us to lower taxation. So your income and property taxes could inherently be lower due to the fact that we wouldn't be spending as much at the national level. We wouldn't need to be taking all that money from people. Along with, we could reinvest the money that we would still have at the national level. We could reinvest that into actual infrastructure throughout the entire country, throughout Iowa. It came out just a few years ago that 80% of the bridges in Iowa were not up to DOT regulations, which is absolutely terrifying to figure that 80% of our bridges here aren't up to DOT regulations. Iowa is in the top 4 up to regulation road work in the country. Mm-hmm. When you think our bridges, 80% of them aren't good, and we're the best out there, that's absolutely terrifying.
It feels like there are landmines across the entire country.
No, you would think you're just like, oh, well, now I understand why I have to get new ball joints every time I drive through Illinois, or every time I go through Missouri, and I need a new alignment.
I kind of want to do a bit of a rapid fire or speed run on policy, just to get your campaign's general stance on some of these hot button issues. First and foremost, reproductive freedom. It's since the overturning of Roe v. Wade, this is quite an emerging issue, and it's got a lot of concern around it, given that it's become a patchwork of regulations around this issue across the nation, and some surrounding states of Iowa have different policies. What's your campaign's general stance on reproductive issues?
The government should not have any ability whatsoever to tell you anything to do medically, whether that be abortion, vaccination, any medical treatments that you have. Say you have a long-term medical treatment, like a friend of mine, she has leukemia. It is a terminal form of leukemia. The government should not be able to tell her what she can use to treat that. Same thing with abortion rights. That is an issue between a woman and her doctor, not a woman and her doctor and the United States government.
Next issue is housing insecurity and inflation in the economy.
So inflation was largely caused by the deficit spending that we've been doing. The Federal Reserve has just been printing out money, adding money to the currency pool, which has devalued our money significantly. I can remember things being almost half the price that they are right now. I'm not that old. It's not like I'm your grandfather. It's
Even
like,
in my own lifetime,
yeah,
I've seen things just about double in price.
No, it's insanity to see prices doubling that large, and a good portion of it I know is because of the added currency to our monetary markets, along with the logistical cost of everything. I work in logistics, and I know there's been a massive breakdown in the last few years. And a lot of people would like to say, well, it's just post-COVID. No, it's not. It's actually been significantly longer than that. There has been a logistical breakdown in our country and globally.
Would you say this deficit spending issue is kind of an undercurrent for all policy stances that you have? Anything that would increase that deficit spending would kind of...
It is not a blanket for all policies I have, but it is definitely backing a good portion of it.
Social safety nets / government aid programs.
So if you look at the government aid programs that we've had so far, they're all failing. And it was largely because they weren't designed to ever work. The largest one the United States has had is the Social Security Network.
Mm-hmm.
So you pay into the Social Security Network your entire life for the chance of seeing a little bit of that towards the very end of your life. I know for myself, by Social Security standards, I can retire at, I believe it's 67 and a half. And then you look into average life expectancy after that, I would have approximately 5 to 6 years to live on Social Security that I have been at that point paying for 50 years. There's zero chance that I could ever see a return on investment on that. Then along with the fact it is by textbook definition a Ponzi scheme. It started off with a small group of people that had invested money, and the group has to continually grow, or else that group that is now in the retirement area can't ever receive. And if you look at our population pyramids, the younger generations are starting to kind of taper down. There's less children being born, therefore there is less people to funnel money into that Ponzi scheme that we like to refer to as Social Security.
Would you support a restructuring of the agencies and aid programs that already exist, or an abolition, possibly building from the ground up again?
We would have to just completely abolish it and rebuild at this point, because of how deeply most of these have failed so far. They're very incorrectly ran. Economists weren't the people that helped make these. It was made largely by people that didn't know what they were doing initially and just went with, well, this sounds right, so let's do it. Which most of them do, in theory, sound really well. But in practice, they haven't been working. So, and I myself, I don't know how to fix it myself. I know there are people out there that do. And we would have to find those people. Like our vice presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party, Mike Jorna, he's an economist. He knows how to do these kind of things. And we could ask him, we'd be like, hey, Mike, how would you do this along with this panel of other people, so that way we have a good group of people to come up with this idea, as opposed to people that had no idea what they were doing.
Next one is agriculture and pollution slash, environmental protections in general, I guess, big issue in Iowa.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I grew up on a cattle ranch. We have corn and soybeans out there as well. So agriculture is huge in my family.
I'm not actually from Iowa, but even I've been blown away, the culture shock of how ingrained agriculture is.
It's everywhere here
in Iowa.
I mean, even our college football team here in town, they have America Needs Farmers on their uniforms because they are a keystone to Iowa. I mean, Iowa is an agrarian state. We do have industry here, and we do have the largest telecommunications center in the world is over in Des Moines, but Iowa is inherently agrarian. I mean, you drive around, you see fields. We're an agrarian area.
And many of them.
Mm-hmm. And what we could definitely do on that is, and I know smaller farmers have done much more sustainable practices for farming. They've done terracing, they've done no-till. It's the larger corporate farms that have been largely destroying the environment because they don't care. They don't live here, so it's not that big of an issue for them to destroy Iowa. Largely they're from California and China, so them destroying Iowa is not a big deal, as opposed to us in Iowa watching the corporate farming that's taking over the century farms. Like my family's farm is a century farm, meaning it's been in the family for over 100 years. Mm-hmm. But watching these corporate farming organizations take over and just destroy everything we had built it's devastating.
Policy-wise, would that look like enforcement further?
Limitation.
Enforcement,
yeah,
or
it'd be
more
limitation on corporate entities purchasing land for agricultural purposes. Because I know a really, really large thing here would be so corn producers have the ethanol incentives.
Mm-hmm.
If we remove those ethanol incentives, then corporate entities no longer have the incentive to buy the land to take it. So it would default back onto more localized farmers they're not going to have the large fields that the ethanol incentives would have ever incentivized them to do it. They'll go back to producing food instead of crops for the specific purpose of getting the government incentive money.
Another one is child tax credit.
And I have children, so this is something that it's personally affected me, and whether or not you have children shouldn't change the amount that you're paying in taxes. The amount that we pay in taxes should be, as a libertarian, we believe it should be abolished entirely, but as a realist, I understand that we have to pay taxes. No politician is going to be able to, at the federal level, be like, yeah, let's get rid of taxes. Let's take it back to 1912, prior to the income tax situation. I would love to see us absolutely have no income taxes, but at current state, that's not possible. We can definitely eliminate a lot of government overspending, that we can eliminate a lot of taxes. And as far as child tax credit, it's a system that I myself have used, but it doesn't really make sense that you would get a tax credit to have a child for your child to then use government funds. It seems like a very backwards system.
It does seem a little redundant.
Mm.
Last one is Medicare for all, the general state of the
Yes.
healthcare system in the United States.
The Medicare system that we have, it would need to be significantly revamped for that to even be a viable option. I've used the VA system before. The United States is a prime example of social medicine, and it's absolutely terrible. Mm-hmm. The VA hospital itself, especially ours here in Iowa City, is great, but access to it is atrocious. They've had what us veterans like to refer to as the wait and die method of treatment, because they're incredibly understaffed, they're incredibly underfunded. They can't treat.
I think Most people have heard of the VA nightmare stories of just waiting years and years to get any kind of assistance or approval to get assistance.
Yeah, and for us to then expand social medicine to the rest, because the VA system's 10% of the United States, to expand that to the remaining 90%, it's not viable at current state. What we could do is return costs back to the pre-insurance days. So a lot of people aren't fully aware that medical insurance in the United States wasn't developed because we decided that, oh yeah, having medical insurance would be a great idea. It was actually designed to keep wages lower. At the time, it was illegal for companies to raise wages because there just wasn't the money out there. It just wasn't a thing. So they come up with the healthcare system where a company, instead of offering you more money, would offer you paid-in health insurance, which then just the healthcare system was like, well, the company's going to pay for it, so we can just raise these prices now. It's already paid for. We'll make a little extra money, and everybody's happy.
So your approach is kind of a top-down, tackling the price levels of Medicare.
So like hospitals have what's called the cost master. That is the actual cost of your health care. You should be able to pay directly off the cost master, not, well, the hospital tells your insurance company this, which will then tell you this, so that way they can raise all these numbers and make it look like the health insurance company is paying a ton, when in all actuality, they're paying what's directly off the cost master. So you look at like an IV bag, it's saline, so salt water in a little bit of plastic. Your bill for that, after the insurance company adjusts the numbers, is going to say it's about $1,000. And the insurance company is like, oh yeah, we paid $1,000 for that IV bag. I could go buy a pint of water and a tablespoon of salt, and I guarantee it's not going to cost me $1,000. What the health insurance company is actually going on is they're going to go off the cost master, which is going to say, oh, this is a $2.50 IV bag. You're going to pay $2.50. And then health insurance is like, absolutely, yeah, $2.50 for a pint of salt water sounds completely reasonable. And then they're going to say, well, actually, it costs us $1,000, so we put out $1,000 for you. So that way you're less disgusted with the fact that you're paying, oh, I think I'm at it's $136 a month for health insurance, along with the fact that I still have a deductible, and I go to the hospital twice in the last decade.
Shifting back to the position specifically, this congressional seat, what life, political, or career experiences do you have that's uniquely prepare you for this role?
Well, I have the military experience, which a lot of politicians have military experience. I think it kind of goes hand in hand with politicians want to serve the people. Many of them, when we were younger, we decided the best way to serve people was to join the military, which actually does teach you a lot of good rank and file and leadership abilities. Along with, I have been the Libertarian Party chairman for Johnson County now for quite a while. I am Libertarian Party D1 rep. So all of District 1, all of the other county chairmen and whatnot, if they have questions, I'm the person that they come to prior to us going higher to the state chair and co-chairs. Yeah, and then I'm also a city councilman, so I've had a fair amount of political experience.
Regarding the panel vote that took place this past, was it Wednesday?
Wednesday. Yes.
Wednesday. There was a vote that took place to remove the Libertarian candidates from the general election ballot in the state of Iowa. As a candidate for neither of the two dominant parties, what's the significance of having access to the general election ballot, and how will this affect the choices that Iowans have on election day?
Well, so it was largely that the Republican Party saw that if the Libertarians are on the ballot, they had a very, very low chance of winning. When you look at in this district, so Marinette Miller-Meeks and Christina Bohannon are the Republican and Democratic candidates right now, and then myself as the Libertarian candidate. Marinette Miller-Meeks won by extremely narrow margins the last two times. You look back in 2020, she won by, I believe it was 22,000 votes. So less than the population of Coralville, north of Interstate 80. And then in 2022, I believe it was 6 points. So another insanely narrow margin. Then you look at her last election in the primaries. She won by 6 votes.
6 votes?
Votes. 6 people were determining on that. She's not even a popular candidate in her own party. And the Republican Party was aware of that. So they're fully aware that in a 3-way race they can't win. Now, in a 2-way race, because the Republicans have redistricted the state, so they have a, so District 1 is the closest margin that they are +3 for percentage-wise. District 4 is by far their widest margin. I believe it's like +12. And you look at the redistricting that they've done, simply so they hold a margin in all 4 districts and islands. Absolutely ludicrous, but in specifically 1 and 3, their margins are very, very narrow. So if there is a third candidate on the ballot, it's incredibly difficult for them to win.
What does this say about those that filed the motion to question the ballot access of the Libertarian Party? What does this mean for the choices that people have and choose in democracy?
No, they wanted to limit your choices. I believe Jules had put it the best. Jules Cutler Jules is the state chairperson, and so Jules came from the Soviet Union. She's a refugee immigrant from the Soviet Union, and the way she had put it was, growing up in the Soviet Union, they had made sure there was only one party on the ballot. It was the Communist Party, so that way you had no other options outside of that. What they're doing now here in the United States is they're trying to limit you to 2 parties. Now they want to limit you to 1, but they can't outright do that because, well, that would look absolutely terrible, but they can at least limit you to 2, which I know our party and many other parties throughout the United States have been actively fighting with that. You know, you have libertarians, you have the Green Party, constitutionalists, and a myriad of other parties that have been fighting these ballot access issues, so that way the American people will have the ability to vote for more than just red or blue, much like you see in almost every other developed nation. You look throughout all of Europe, Canada, there's multiple parties on their ballots, so you can actually effectively represent the people of those areas, as opposed to, well, that guy's got a red tie on, I guess I'll vote for that guy, or well, that person has a blue tie on, so we'll go with that.
It feels like a very subtle distinction between picking and choosing, between these are my options, so I have to pick, and this is my choice, I want to support this candidate. How is your campaign responding to this vote? How will your campaign be going forward?
So we've already filed our appeal. I have the specific case number on that. So we've already filed the appeal. We're going through the appeal process. As far as my campaign personally, I've done nothing differently. I'm still very actively campaigning, out here doing interviews like this. I've done multiple television interviews, radio interviews, newspaper interviews. And even if our appeal doesn't go through, we're still going to continue doing everything that we've been doing. The only difference is I have to make sure everybody knows how to spell my name properly, because as a write-in candidate, it has to be perfectly spelled. So Nicholas, common spelling, Gluba.
The campaign trail seems like even in the off season of campaigning, when it's not an approaching election, it does inform the party in general to be out and, talking to constituents, potential constituents. What is your response to claims that you may be a spoiler candidate for either of the parties, but I think it's more leaning towards the Democratic Party?
So they've claimed that third parties are spoiler candidates for years now. My personal stance on that is, if you really wanted to get those constituents, you would have actually gone out there yourself to get them, as opposed to me getting them. If I'm a spoiler candidate, so be it, but I would like to say I didn't steal those votes. I went out and got them. becoming a favorable opinion to the people that voted for me. The people that I've had contact me and they're like, hey, I saw your platform, I saw you on Facebook, or I saw your website. And I was like, well, if you like what you saw, just go ahead and tell me and we can have a conversation about it.
Asking probably the final question here, what concerns are your opposition candidates not quite addressing that you really feel that you can deliver on?
As far as Christina Bohannon's side, because they both have areas where they're lacking, and they both do have areas where they're strong. I will say Christina Bohannon and her fight for maintaining abortion rights for women in the United States is amazing. However, her financial side, I believe she's kind of lagging on. Her side of the political spectrum believes very, very highly in government spending. The government doesn't have money to spend. It's just like you or I, if we go out to a grocery store and we're like, hey, I would like to buy $7,000 worth of food, or aka a half a cart of food right now. You don't have $7,000, you have to put it on a credit card. That's what the United States has been doing. It just has a much bigger credit card than either you or I have the access to. Then on Marion M. Miller Meeks' side, so she has been trying to work with the Veterans Affairs and the Veterans Administration pretty well. She's looked into medical cannabis for veterans to help with anxiety and PTSD issues, which I can tell you from experience that I have with many of my veteran friends, cannabis usage has helped them greatly with PTSD and anxiety. But where she's lacking is more on the social aspects of people's rights. She herself wanted to reduce, and I believe she even backed the 6-week bill in Iowa. She herself didn't vote because obviously U.S. Congress as opposed to Iowa Congress, but she did support it. I believe it's wrong for the United States government to hold back medical treatment for anybody, along with a few other stances that she's had, but just on the social aspect, I just didn't agree with. Her fiscal aspect, she goes back and forth on it so frequently that it's very, very difficult for me to specifically say, oh, I disagree with this one because, oh, I disagree with her stance on that right now, but in 2 weeks it's going to be completely different. I know that's been, a lot of people from her party have been incredibly critical about her on that, and the fact that she will go back and forth, sometimes in the same sentence, on where her specific stance is on something. And you're like, well, how do I go against that? Because, oh, I agree with you right now, but in 5 minutes you're going to say something different that completely contradicts where you're at. So
I know the Miller Meeks and Bohannon rivalry has gone on for a couple of different elections. What niche do you believe that you feel that you fill between these two candidates?
So I'm more representative of the actual people of the area. When you look at Bohannon and Miller Meeks, you're looking at a retired doctor and an environmental protection lawyer who worked for the University of Iowa teaching law there, as opposed to myself. I work in a warehouse and I'm a chef at a very small event center over in the Amanas. I work for Whirlpool Corporation at their warehouse in North Liberty. When you look at the other candidates, they're very, very wealthy people. I live in, I believe I am 2 or 3 square feet above average for house size in this district. I have a completely average vehicle. My wife and I have incredibly average to slightly below average vehicles. We're very average income. I am 6 months older than the median age of the district. So we are the average people of this district. We're not the ultra elite retired doctors or environmental protection lawyers that have made millions upon millions of dollars. As soon as I get out of this interview, I'm going to Walmart for grocery shopping because that's what I can afford is Walmart groceries. I don't have the ability to pick up artisanal things from whatnot. I am just a regular person, and the cost of things that affects me very personally because we're very average income. We get paid bi-weekly like everybody else in this district.
I I want to say, as a firm believer in democratic principles, it should be governed by the people, for the people. And so I'm a big proponent of, if you're a member of the community, I believe that qualifies you to speak on behalf of your neighbors if you know them. Nicholas Gluba, thank you so much for sitting down with me. I look forward to watching your campaign in the future, what all happens, and thank you.
Excellent, thank you.